Imagine a late afternoon in America where the smell of fried food usually floats through diners, drive-ins, and family kitchens. Cars line up, menus glow, and baskets arrive at tables filled with familiar comfort. Now imagine something missing from that moment. Not the burger, not the fries. Something quieter, something that never got the spotlight, yet somehow held the whole experience together. Onion rings? In this version of America, onion rings were never invented. The idea of slicing an onion, coating it in batter, and dropping it into hot oil simply never crossed anyone's mind. Onions existed, of course. They flavored sauces, hid inside burgers, softened in stews, but they were never celebrated on their own. Never crunchy, never golden, never stacked on the side of a plate like small, fragile crowns. At first, no one noticed. Restaurants still opened their doors. Menus still looked full. Fries ruled the sides without competition, confident and unquestioned. Burgers arrived with lettuce, and tomato shakes still clinked against glass, and America kept eating without realizing something was missing. But slowly, something felt flatter. Drive-ins lost a little bit of magic. That extra crunch people used to reach for between bites of a burger didn't exist. There was no playful contrast of sweet onion and crispy batter. No ring to dip, no stack to steal from the basket while pretending it wasn't yours. Food became more predictable. Families sat at booths, conversations drifting as usual, yet the meals no longer surprised anyone. Without onion rings, side dishes stopped being a choice and became a habit. Fries were always there doing their job, never challenging the taste buds, never offering something slightly bitter, slightly sweet, slightly messy. Diners changed to short-order cooks worked their grills, night after night, flipping patties, salting fries, wiping counters. Their menus stayed efficient, but lost a layer of creativity. Onion rings had once been the side that said, "This place does things a little differently." Without them, every diner started to feel the same. Even fast food chains noticed it, though they couldn't explain why sales numbers felt oddly steady but uninspired. Customers came back, but they didn't linger. They ate and left. No debates over sides, no moment of indecision at the counter, no small joy of choosing something indulgent instead of practical. And somewhere along the way, America lost a tiny ritual. Onion rings had never been just food. They were pauses between bites. They were shared without asking. They were the reason hands reached into the middle of the table. Without them, meals became more individual, more contained, more orderly. No one talked about it, no one complained. Because you can't miss what you never had. But comfort food, true comfort food, is built from contrasts, soft and crunchy, salty and sweet, familiar and unexpected. Without onion rings, American food leaned too heavily on sameness. And deep beneath the surface of everyday meals, something waited to be discovered. Because the absence of onion rings didn't just change what people ate, it quietly changed how they experienced food. As the years passed in this onion ringless America, food culture settled into a comfortable routine that few questioned. Burgers were still celebrated, fries still dominated every plate, but the edges of the experience grew dull. Meals became efficient rather than memorable. The small thrill of choosing something different had faded, replaced by predictable satisfaction. Restaurants adapted without realizing what they had lost. Menus leaned toward simplicity, trimming away anything that felt unnecessary. Without onion rings, the idea of turning a simple vegetable into something indulgent never fully took hold. Fried foods existed, but they followed strict rules. Chicken, fish, potatoes. Onions remained hidden, cooked down into sauces or pressed flat beneath beef patties, never allowed to stand alone. This absence shaped kitchens in subtle ways. Cooks stopped experimenting with batters that needed to cling just right. There was no reason to perfect that balance between light and crisp. No challenge in coating a round, slippery slice and pulling it from the oil at the exact moment it turned golden. Fryers became tools of repetition instead of creativity. Oil temperatures stayed safe, never pushed. At home, families passed down recipes that felt practical but incomplete. Children learned how to mash potatoes, bake casseroles, and roast vegetables, but they never learned that an onion could transform into something playful. Onions were treated with caution, even suspicion. They were chopped finely to disappear, never sliced thick enough to be noticed. Snack culture shifted as well. Game nights lacked that basket everyone reached into without thinking. Backyard barbecues featured plates that felt orderly, almost polite. There was nothing messy enough to demand extra napkins, nothing crunchy enough to interrupt conversation with sound. Food stopped being a shared experience and became something neatly consumed. The emotional side of eating changed too. Comfort food is often about more than hunger. It's about texture, surprise, and indulgence without explanation. Without onion rings, that layer of emotional satisfaction thinned. People still felt full, but meals rarely felt complete. The kind of comfort that makes time slow for a moment became harder to find. Food critics of this world wrote about nostalgia without knowing what they were missing. They praised balance and tradition, unaware that something playful had never entered the equation. They spoke of classic American sides, but their classics were quieter, safer, less expressive. Even regional identity softened. Certain diners used to be remembered for their onion rings, the way the batter shattered just right, or the onions stayed sweet inside. Without that marker, places blended together. Road trips blurred. Stops along highways became interchangeable, each offering the same experience, the same sides, the same predictable satisfaction. America still loved fried food, it just didn't love it deeply, and somewhere in the background, a question lingered without words. Why did food feel less joyful than it should? Why did meals end without that last, satisfying crunch? No one had the answer, because the idea had never existed. Until one small kitchen in one ordinary town began experimenting out of boredom rather than intention. A cook sliced an onion thicker than usual. Not for a reason, just curiosity, and for the first time in this world, something unexpected brushed against hot oil. The oil reacted instantly, not violently, not dramatically, but with a sound that felt different from anything the cook had heard before. It wasn't the sharp hiss of fries or the steady sizzle of chicken. This sound was lighter, almost curious, as if the oil itself was surprised by what it was touching. The onion slice floated for a moment, pale and exposed, before slowly sinking. The batter clung in places it shouldn't have, forming soft ridges along the curve. The cook watched, unsure whether to pull it out or let it continue. Something about the shape felt wrong and right at the same time, too simple to matter, too strange to ignore. As seconds passed, the surface began to change. The pale coating deepened, turning from beige to gold. Tiny bubbles raced across the edge, chasing each other around the circle. The smell shifted too. It wasn't just fried oil anymore. There was sweetness in the air, a warmth that felt fuller, rounder. The cook lifted the slice out and placed it on a paper towel. It rested there quietly, steam rising in thin lines. The shape held. The batter stayed crisp. The onion inside softened without disappearing. Nothing happened for a moment, then the cook tasted it. The reaction was immediate, though impossible to explain. The crunch arrived first, clean and sharp, followed by a sweetness that spread slowly instead of fading. The onion didn't fight the batter. It worked with it. The contrast felt natural, like something that had always belonged but had simply never been invited. The cook made another, then another. By the end of the shift, a small pile sat cooling on the counter, each one slightly different, each one unmistakably something new. They weren't fries, they weren't vegetables in disguise. They were something in between, something that made no sense on paper but felt complete on the plate. The next day, the cook offered them quietly. No announcement, no explanation. Just placed them beside a burger, where fries usually went. People noticed immediately. Hands paused, mid-reach. Eyes narrowed in curiosity. The first bite brought surprise, then silence. The kind of silence that follows discovery, not disappointment. The crunch cut through the room. Heads tilted slightly, as if people were trying to understand why something so simple felt so right. Word didn't spread fast. It spread deeply. Customers came back, not knowing why they wanted to return. They ordered the same thing again, chasing a feeling they couldn't describe. The diner felt warmer, louder, in the right places. People lingered longer, baskets emptier, but plates more satisfying. Other kitchens noticed. Soon, variations appeared. Thicker batter, lighter batter. Different seasonings, some failed, some succeeded. But the idea held. A single onion, treated with care, transformed into something indulgent and shareable. Food culture began to shift. Menus gained an extra line, choices returned. Meals stopped being predictable again. There was something to debate, something to steal from the middle of the table. Hands reached across plates without asking. The country didn't change overnight. But something loosened. Comfort food found its missing contrast. Sweet met salty, soft met crisp, familiar met unexpected. And slowly, without realizing it, America learned what it had been missing all along. What began as a quiet experiment became something much larger, though no one could pinpoint the exact moment it crossed that line. Onion rings didn't announce themselves. They didn't demand attention. They simply appeared, basket by basket, table by table, until they felt like they had always been there. Roadside diners became destinations again. People talked about places not for their burgers, but for the onion rings that came alongside them, thick cut or thin, light and airy or deeply crisp. Some shattered at the bite, others bent slightly before breaking. Each variation carried the personality of the kitchen that made it. Food memories started forming around them. Families remembered road trips by the stops where onion rings were shared. Children learned the ritual of dipping, of choosing the perfect ring, of leaving the smallest one behind. Plates became communal again. Meals slowed down. Conversation filled the gaps between bites. Fast food chains noticed the shift and followed. They added onion rings cautiously at first, testing the response. The response was immediate. People ordered them not because they were hungry, but because they wanted that feeling again, the one that made a meal feel complete. Comfort food reclaimed its depth. Onion rings became more than a side. They were permission to indulge without explanation. They were the crunch that broke routine, the sweetness that softened salt. They reminded people that food didn't have to be efficient to be satisfying. Even cooking changed. Kitchens pushed their fryers further, learning the balance between heat and timing. Batter recipes became guarded secrets. Small details mattered again, the way a ring cooled the moment it was served, the sound it made when placed on a plate. And beneath all of it, something else returned: joy. Not loud joy, not dramatic joy. The quiet kind that shows up when a meal surprises you in the best way. The kind that lingers after the plate is empty. In this world, onion rings had once not existed, and without them, American food had survived, but it had been incomplete. Something essential had been missing, not in quantity, but in feeling. Because onion rings were never about onions. They were about contrast, about sharing, about giving people something simple that felt special. Today, no one questions them. They sit comfortably beside burgers and sandwiches woven into the fabric of everyday meals. They don't ask for credit, they don't need it. But every time someone reaches into the basket for just one more, they're touching a reminder of how easily a small idea can change an entire experience, and how different America might have felt if onion rings had never existed.